The Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg has granted a long postponement to former President Jacob Zuma's private prosecution of his successor, President Cyril Ramaphosa.
The draft order marked X is made an order of court.
As it pleases the court, my lord.
Zuma appeared in the court on Friday in his capacity as a private prosecutor to ensure the matter remains on the roll. Ramaphosa, however, was not obligated to appear in the criminal dock due to the interim interdict he obtained in January, pending the outcome of his legal challenge. The matter, which was recently heard before a full bench, is awaiting judgment.
So, from a practical point of view, my lord, to allow the space for the judgment, we thought if it pleases your lordship, we would ask for a longish postponement so that at the next appearance, of course, we'll also report back to the court and take it from there.
Zuma is attempting to haul Ramaphosa to the criminal court over the alleged disclosure of his health records during his corruption trial in the KZN High Court in Pietermaritzburg. The former president accuses the incumbent of failing to act on the alleged breach, which he argues compromised the NPA and by extension the criminal justice system as a whole. Zuma, through his lawyers, further took the opportunity to address his concerns surrounding his private prosecution bid.
There has been a pattern of, I don't know what to call it, whether it's a ghost law or a sabotage. Every time this matter has to sit here, we have to be struggling for days to have it placed on the roll, which is surprising because it was postponed to a particular date. It might be that it's a matter that we should raise with the registrars rather than your lordship, but it was, my instruction is just to raise it, my lord.
The matter returns to the criminal court on 29 August 2023. Kani Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, let's now bring in SABC News reporter Kenny Mapanga to understand the court proceedings today that led to the postponement. Well, she's been following this story. Now, Kenny, very good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Good afternoon to you, Sim, and the viewers at home.
Just give us more details as to what really led to the postponement of this particular case and, just the ongoings of this case.
Well, it's really quite simple. Because this matter is being challenged, the private prosecution itself, it's created a scenario where you have parallel hearings, one in the criminal court and one in the civil court. So, of course, pending that hearing a few weeks ago of the president's legal challenge of the private prosecution itself, the former president, in his capacity as a private prosecutor, has ensured that he's maintained the appearances that he needs to upkeep as the private prosecutor there in the criminal courts. So those dates are always a bit closer together, but what we've seen this morning is that they've gone to seek a longer postponement, which they were granted, which is August, pending the outcome of Part B of the president's application. Because what happens in the private prosecution bid at this stage is heavily reliant on the outcome of that case heard by the full bench. So until that outcome or that judgment is delivered, the former president will have to keep going to court to ensure that the matter remains on the roll, but he won't be able to take it forward until we understand what the outcome in Part B is.
Remember that early this year, President Ramaphosa told the Johannesburg High Court that he wants an urgent interdict, to stop or prevent former President Jacob Zuma from holding him before the courts because he argued that it infringed on his constitutional right.
Correct.
But the question is, how then does it affect the country as a whole, as he argued?
Well, what he's saying is that the process itself leading up to the private prosecution is constitutionally flawed. He's saying that the relief that was sought from him or the calls made by the former president would have only been done by him in his capacity as president. So he went to the courts in January saying that he would have suffered irreparable harm, not only as an individual, but as a head of state. He would have been halted from performing his duties if he was hauled before the criminal dock. So he intended to protect his fundamental rights by asking the court to allow him the space to challenge the actual private prosecution itself, which he believes does not apply to him and he believes is constitutionally flawed. So what you saw was an interim order being granted pending the finality of Part B. So the interim order was granted in January. We haven't gotten the outcome of Part B as that judgment is still reserved. We don't have a date yet on that. So pending that outcome, that interim order still stands and the full bench will then have to make a determination on the issues that he's raised before that court. But the relief that he sought still stands with the final interdict. So If he is successful in getting this final interdict, it would have a significant impact on the private prosecution, because it would mean that the former president could not continue with it now or in the future. However, if he's not successful, then the former president can still pursue his private prosecution, and then would have to see that play out as that is.
Yeah, and since he argues that is rumor in this particular case, he argues that this case is constitutionally flawed. I want us to talk a bit about some of these flaws that President Ramaphosa has identified in this case, and are they robust enough to warrant the court to throw the case out?
Well, the robustness of the arguments, I think the legal analyst can take that forward.
Okay.
But the constitutionally flawed process he's talking about is the procedure that led up to those summons being issued right before Nasrec in December. So what he's saying is that those nolli prosecute certificates, the two that were issued, he argues that they did not apply to him. Remember, this is relating to the matter of the alleged disclosure of the former president's health records in his corruption trial that is currently before the KZN High Court in Pietermaritzburg. So we already know that there is a senior prosecutor and a journalist that have been summoned regarding that matter. So the third category he came up with was the accessory after the fact, and that is how the president comes into play. Now, the second nolli prosecute certificate, which he is also challenging, that is the one that almost broadened the scope, because it referred to, quote unquote, the NPA declines to prosecute, quote unquote, anybody in the matter. Now, because the president was mentioned in the docket, it is against that premise that the former president then issued those summons. But we've heard in the court hearings the circumstance upon which the president was mentioned. He was mentioned to indicate that on this alleged disclosure, he wrote in that supplementary affidavit, or the former president rather wrote in that supplementary affidavit before the KZN High Court, that he was actually explaining that he had written a complaint to the president and that the president was investigating it. So there's a bit of confusion as to whether that nolli prosecute certificate actually applies to the president or not, or whether it's constitutionally valid. And those are the issues that the full bench must determine.
And remember that initially it was argued that the former President Zuma did himself a huge disservice by deliberately framing the case made for setting aside the summons. Did he shoot himself in the foot? Was he misinformed in this particular instance?
In opposing the application,
in opposing the application, that is, yeah.
Well, the former president has interpreted the issue differently, saying that these are two different courts. He submitted that the civil court does not have a jurisdiction, rather, to hear this matter. He said that people get hauled before criminal courts all the time. We've seen private prosecutions in South Africa all the time, especially by lobby group AfriForum. And he's argued that the actual statute itself that governs those proceedings, the Criminal Procedure Act, actually dictates when you raise your concerns regarding the validity of a private prosecution. So it's his submission, rather, that the entire issue didn't have to take place in two different courts. It could have been ventilated in the criminal courts. But that also is another issue that the full bench must determine in their judgment as well.
All we have to see is just wait.
Yes.
Great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that was SABC News reporter Kenny Mapanga just giving us an update on the postponement of former President Jacob Zuma's private prosecution bid against President Cyril Ramaphosa.